You've put it live, I'm assuming,
Yes.
and muted the music. All right. Hello, pretty casual gaming. It's your main host, Tehnoobcake here, and with me, as always, is Slanderman,
Hello.
and with us yet again is Logix.
Hello.
And I've turned off my Discord. Whoops. For all of you watching on YouTube, I'm doing the early message of the usual crap. Please subscribe, please like, please comment, please talk to us. And everyone on Twitch, feel free to talk in the comments. And if you haven't already, please follow the channel. In this episode, we are planning to talk about villains and heroes. What makes them good, what makes them bad, what makes forgettable ones, what makes good ones that you'll always remember, and what makes ones that completely ruin games. Borderlands 3. This week's episode was actually designed by Logix, who just thought of it out of nowhere, and we've planned for it and that lot. We all had to try think of a couple of characters, be they protagonists or antagonists, to talk about really, and talk about what makes us feel the way we feel about them. Slandy has prepared Wesker.
Yes.
I know for a fact most of mine are Final Fantasy based, and Logix, I believe, has picked some Far Cry characters.
Yeah, Far Cry and Watch Dogs.
Because I know that my co-hosts have decided to not think as hard about protagonists and instead antagonists, I think we'll start with that one. So first of all, we each should name, in our opinion, the number one antagonist slash villain character that we have in our repertoire. Like, which villain slash antagonist in video games would you say is your favorite of all time, and why? We'll start with you, Logix.
That's a tricky one. My favorite, well, I have two favorites really. Obviously Handsome Jack, which I think we can all agree on.
He's pretty handsome.
And yeah, and John Seed from Far Cry 5, or Joseph Seed, whatever his name is.
I'll be honest, I thought he was going to say John Cena.
No.
But you got to pick one, and why?
If I have to pick one, it's going to be Handsome Jack. Because, he just has all of the charisma and then some. And he's funny. And he's handsome.
So I have a feeling I already know your answer, but Slandy, who would you pick as your number one villain and why?
I believe that would be Albert Wesker.
No!
Because first shoots dogs in the forest with sunglasses on and have his hair set perfect, his uniform perfect and everything, and he just shoots the dogs running after his teammates. So yeah, Albert Wesker, I would say him because for most of the games he's either one of the main villains or he is actually still kind of the main villain in other games, but he doing a bit more behind the scenes stuff, and that goes through like 5 games, I believe. Might actually be a bit more in some of the spin-offs as well. So what about you?
Well, for mine, it would be... Everyone's going to expect me to say a Final Fantasy 14 character, and I'm only going to slightly shock you. It's a Final Fantasy 6 character.
Oh no!
Which would be Kefka. One of the reasons why I like him is, for all intents and purposes, he actually succeeds in his plan. He actually destroys the world. He actually ascends to godhood. I mean, obviously you beat him, but he still he won, if you think about it. So definitely Kefka for me, because it was nice to have a villain that isn't, didn't just lose in the end. Like, he actually did some fair bit of damage before going.
Yeah, I think it's great when you have a villain who actually is capable of beating you, and you spend the entire game worrying about whether or not they actually will.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you have a game where a villain actually wins in the end, that's fantastic. And I guess to some extent, I want to say Joseph Seed in Far Cry 5, obviously spoilers for that game. Towards the end, there is a possible ending you can get where you resist him. He asks you to basically just walk away. And if you resist him, he pretty much wins, essentially. He's been paying very close attention to the news in the game, and towards the end, there is a nuclear war, which he's kind of, predicted. And you end up becoming a slave to him, essentially. He ends up taking you into a bunker and, ties you up, and you're his now, essentially. Which, for all intents and purposes, he wins in that ending, despite you trying so hard to kill him.
That was a pretty decent ending.
Yeah.
But homing in on who you said as your favourite, because this is the easiest way to immediately get us onto a big conversation of what makes a good villain and what makes a terrible villain. So we're going to focus on a certain series right now and go with Borderlands.
Mm-hmm.
Because Borderlands 1, it had a villain, sort of, but we didn't care. The game was new. It was a new series. We didn't have much expectations, and so the kind of forgettable villain was forgettable, but it didn't bother us because obviously we wasn't used to anything better. And then Borderlands 2 comes along and introduces one of what is the best villains in video game history. I think definitely if you're going to have a top 10 villains in gaming, somewhere you've got to have Handsome Jack on that list, unless obviously you haven't played the games, in which case it's on you. And Jack was fantastic, so much so that he reappeared again in the pre-sequel, and then reappeared again in Tales of the Borderlands, making us truly realise that they just didn't want to get rid of him.
And in the first DLC of Borderlands 3 too.
Yeah, but therein came the problem: is they couldn't keep milking Jack, and they had to create new villains for the series. And what we got was a example of disappointment. Some of the
Twins.
most
For sure.
boring villains and most irritating. Like, I appreciate a good villain who you can hate, but who you can hate for good reason, and they become great to you because of how well you hate them because of good story writing. I didn't feel like Tyrene had that. Logix, you've actually played Borderlands 3 probably the most out of us here. I don't even know if Slandy's played Borderlands. Have you, Slandy?
A little bit. I didn't complete it.
Well, there's that. So you are going to have the highest amount of talking points because you've actually played that game a lot. Whereas I've played through it once back when it first came out in like the first week. And then I lost my save data and I've not replayed it because that's how bad those villains are. Because I've done Borderlands 2 tons. I played that game so much that I burnt myself out of it because Jack was just that good. And it really was a case of Jack was that good. Because the gameplay, in my opinion, wasn't that decent. I couldn't care about much of a story, but Jack really pulled it along for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've played through the story of obviously 2 and 3 many times through now. So, with 3, it's a case of necessity getting characters up to the point where they can unlock mayhem. I think one of the really good things about Handsome Jack was that he was, he was so good that we didn't really want to kill him at the end of Borderlands 2.
I
Like
wanted him to
I
win.
was, I was hesitant. I was very hesitant to kill him or let Lilith take the kill. Whereas with, the Calypso twins, it's just you can't wait to fricking just get to the end of the game and murder their faces off.
But it's not so
Um,
much that you want to kill them because they make you hate them that much because they're good villains and what they're doing is so evil that you psychologically cannot deal with them and you feel like you have to kill them for justice. It's just they're shit. Get off my screen.
Yeah, it's a case if you want to kill them because they're annoying, with the whole freaking live streaming thing. It's just I think that was a little bit too much. They were trying to be a bit too meta with that, I think. Whereas Handsome Jack was just, doing things because, he wanted to, as opposed to that's what's meta right now.
Well, in fairness to Jack as well, like there really is this sense to him, right? He really did think he was actually doing the right thing, and then we're the fucking problem. And in my opinion, I'm kind of on his side.
Yeah.
The Raiders of Borderlands are just shit people, but obviously because you're playing them, they're the protagonists. But they're actually fucking awful people. But Jack should have won.
Yeah, I think if an antagonist has that side to them where you can almost agree with them and you can see some of their points from their point of view, that gives them, a lot of depth, and it makes them more believable. And you don't just want to kill them because they're doing something completely ridiculous. That sometimes they might actually make you question yourself.
Well,
that's extremely important in a game, I think.
if you don't mind me piggybacking onto that and making a small little segue, that actually brings me to a Final Fantasy XIV villain that is currently gone down as probably one of the best JRPG villains of recent time, which would be Emmett Selk, which obviously you haven't got to yet, Logix, because you're not far enough in the game. And Slandy can't appreciate for some reason because he has no appreciation for good story writing. But
I mean, that's perhaps why I like Resident Evil. It's so cheesy.
But to try explain it without going into too many spoilers, essentially the world existed, right? And the apocalypse was happening. Shit was going crazy. They summoned a god, but to summon this god, they had to sacrifice like half their people. The god solved the problem, and then another group of people were like, "This god is bad for us, so we'll summon another god to fight this god." And then that fight ended up in the world shattered into pieces, and everyone's soul and shit got shattered into pieces. Emmett basically wants to restore the world to what it was before, where everyone had the full soul. And suffering and long life. And there wasn't suffering, and people had a long life, and everyone got on. It was really a utopia kind of situation. And he kept slaughtering us, but he didn't see us as people because obviously our soul wasn't full. We weren't, in his eyes, actual people. We were just like these malformed remnants. And he was killing us, thinking that he was helping us to get back to being those full souls, and then he could also bring back his loved ones. And obviously, what it is the story of that is dealing with loss. And everyone at some point in their life, when they lose someone they care about, be it a pet or a person, everyone wants to bring that back, and that is relatable. And that was what was so good about. Granted, like it wasn't just that made people love him. He was one of the sassiest kind of characters you've met, but it was that you could understand why he wanted to do what he was doing. That really made people kind of like him.
Yeah, I think as well it helps if an antagonist has that side to them where you can almost feel sorry for them under certain circumstances. That's really good, and that's what we need more of, honestly. It gives them more depth, so they're not just one-dimensional like the Calypso twins.
And yeah, keeping on to my Final Fantasy and using what you've just said there, I would also say that there's another character that I actually really love that Western audiences don't love so much, but ironically the Eastern audiences do. And obviously the Eastern audiences is the main selling point of this game, really, because it's a Japanese game. Obviously, we're going to care about their own audience more than they are us. And that's Xenos. You haven't met him yet either, but he's a character that a lot of people see as very one-dimensional. There is depth to him, but we don't understand it yet, and they haven't really got into telling his story. But the thing I like about him really is that it's not so much about him having this deep story where he's got these great motivations that we can relate to, and it's just he wants to freaking come beat the shit out of us, honestly.
He just wants to be evil. Nothing more.
Sort of, yeah. I wouldn't even say it's that, because I don't really see him as evil. It's a big thing I have of like, what's the difference between an antagonist and a villain? Is the villain is doing stuff for evil's sake and is trying to destroy the world and all that, and then an antagonist is just there to be a thorn in your side. And I really feel like they're kind of switching Xenos into villain from antagonist in Endwalker. But prior to that, he was really an antagonist. He just popped up, kicked your fucking ass, fucked off. And that's what. But I think there is room for these kind of characters where we don't have a deep backstory or a deep understanding or that aren't relatable to most people. There's room for that, so long as it's like at the side of a villain that's relatable. So you can have both, but they both need to you need to have that one with the other as well. So you've got this thorn in your side whilst you also try and deal with this. Obviously, don't write it like that if you're terrible at writing, because then you just will be awful. Like a good example of that is World of Warcraft. They're terrible at writing two villains at once, and when they do, it all goes to shit. But it really is that case of you can have these evil characters that are evil for Disney villain goal's sake, but you've got to kind of balance it out. Because the thing is, if we keep getting these characters that are relatable, they're gonna get boring. They're gonna go stale because it's all we'll get. And then it's like, well, what's the point? It's just another villain that's relatable. Ooh, big original.
I think
Yeah.
if I think we need bad villains, like bad for the sake of like being terrible in games, so that the ones that are really good can stand out, which is tricky. Because if you just have like really good villains all the time, then they're not going to pop out to you, and you're not going to remember them as easily as you might, one amongst a crowd of really crappy ones.
Definitely. So, Slandy, tell us a bit about why you like cheesy villains. Come on, let it slip. Why don't you appreciate good writing?
I'm not sure. I think it's because it's kind of simple. Like there is not too much going on, and it is basic to understand the person. Like Albert Wesker, he just wants to be a god. He wants to control the world and everything. And
Oh, so he's a politician.
yeah, with a zombie virus in him, and 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 the way he does it is like in the first game he is he's introduced as the captain of the team, and everyone in the game, like the heroes and so on, they believe in him and everything until the end of the game, where he unveils his big plans of just getting his the Stars team in, and yeah, precisely, Wesker is a treasure. But apart from that, he basically gets his entire team inside the mansion's laboratory, and there he reveals his evil plan, which was to test a tyrant. So in that case, there's not a lot of like depth to it. He just wants to be evil. He wants to use his teammates to get that trust at the start, and then he just uses everything he knows in his powers to blow it all up.
And then starts wearing black coats and sunglasses and looks like he's from the Matrix.
Yes. A surprise twist villain, precisely.
So
that's probably also why. Oh, nope. You go.
So you would like La Brea in Around Reborn then?
Yeah, I think I will.
You've played Around Reborn, right? Obviously, because you've done Shadowmeters.
Yeah, a little.
La Brea was the first villain.
You do know the skip dialogue thingy in the game, right?
This is why you can't appreciate good story and good villains. This is why you're useless on this talk. How can you appreciate good villains and good protagonists if you skip dialogue? That is my question to you.
Don't know. I can.
It would be understandable if you could skip it in Borderlands 3. I would forgive you for that.
So, I'm sure we've got plenty more to talk about villains, but whilst I remember it, what would you? Can any of you name like a protagonist that you remember? And it doesn't have to be for good reasons. And you're not stealing my one from Fallout logic. So, that's mine. I will talk about that. But can you think of any protagonist, good or bad, that makes you really remember them because they're either really good or bad?
Well, not particularly. I have a protagonist selected that's, you know, a proper character, has got depth to them, but I don't really know about protagonists who, you know, are like stand out as well as the villains, because I think the villains are, like the characters you play as are usually designed to be you put some of yourself into them. They leave that space for you to put yourself into that character, whereas with the villains, obviously they're just sort of pre-designed. But mine is Aiden Pierce from Watch Dogs, simply because he has a lot going on, and as opposed to just being flat out the hero, he does a lot of very questionable things that sort of eat away at him and his relationships with his family and things like that.
Do you like Red Dead Redemption and the main character? That's pretty. The original
Yeah,
Red Dead Redemption.
I actually have I have Red Dead Redemption 2. I haven't played it yet.
You should play the original. It's
Um,
very much that the main character has his problems and his issues, and it's kind of he's trying to keep his family together, but he's also tearing it apart. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what happens in Watch Dogs as well.
So
He's trying very hard to protect his family, and in the process, puts them in a lot more danger.
Slandy, protagonist slash hero slash good guy character that you remember for good or bad.
Yeah. There's a lot. But I think if I have to say like a character which comes quick to mind, also because it's like the hero which goes up against Wesker the most, it has to be Chris Redfield. Because that head shaking. But yeah, I have to say Chris Redfield because he is the hero who goes always against Wesker after the first betrayal he ever, and you have followed him all the way through the games where Wesker is in as well, where they are basically fighting each other every time, and that's what I think makes a good hero and villain, when there's still some depth between the two. Yeah, that bolting, punching metal lad. So I believe it's when there's a good connection between the heroes and the villains, I do like. Which also comes to my second villain I've been thinking about, General Shepard.
Whoa! I still haven't talked about my good guy. Before we rush into that.
Okay. Yeah.
So you
No,
two
then,
seem to have focused very much on the good guys, and I'm sure you know who I'm about to talk about, given that I've reserved him logic. But I've got one who's a bad good guy, and I wouldn't say he's a protagonist or a hero, but he's a good guy, and that would be Preston Garvey from Fallout 4. He is a garbage character. He's just the worst type of character ever written. And that's because I cannot stand these good guys who are meant to be like flawlessly good and so committed to good. And oh my god, you did something wrong. You're just the worst. And that's all Preston is. He is just this pure character of good, and he's not good as in he's interestingly good or like that. It's just he wants to be this good guy and do good things, and I think what fundamentally annoys me about that is no human, no matter how good they try to be, is pure good. And that's what Preston is meant to represent as a character, is just this goodness in people. But when it's so extreme that that's all he has as a character trait, it's like, this is boring. Stop talking to me. Please go drown in the river nearby. I don't know if you guys are that annoyed by characters like that.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. That's another reason why I picked the character that I picked for, good guy is, Aiden Pierce is not necessarily a good person. He does a lot of criminal activity, and he goes around murdering people and robbing people's bank accounts and stuff to get what he needs to do done. Characters who are just too good, I think they're not very relatable necessarily because, you might think you're doing the right thing, but there's always going to be some part of you that's questioning the decisions you make. And yeah.
I definitely think there's some credit to a character being morally grey.
Oh, that's what I was going to say, yeah. So it kind of ties in with how an antagonist should have that aspect to them where you can see things from their perspective and sometimes think they might actually have a point. It's the same with, the good guys in a game. They should have the opposite, where they do something that you might look down on, that makes you question them.
Well,
And
it'd take a lot for them for me to question them.
yeah, it would, but you know what I mean. Like they should be doing things occasionally that you question, like all the other characters around you are like, whoa, what are you doing? That kind of thing. Which
No,
does happen in some games occasionally, and it's really good.
no, I believe a certain someone wants to speak about another Resident Evil villain, I guess.
Oh.
Oh,
Uh,
so,
um,
second villain.
my second villain wasn't actually a Resident Evil hero I was going to talk about. Oh,
Is it Jill?
no,
Oh,
it's not. She's a hero.
yeah, but you said it was a hero. Your villain, second hero, was a hero.
Did I?
Yeah, you just said your second villain is a hero in Resident
Oh,
Evil.
oof. Oh,
So
well.
who is it? Go on.
No,
Wait for you to talk.
um, I the second villain I had in mind earlier was General Shepard from Modern Warfare, which I was going to talk about before you stopped me.
Yeah, and I'm giving you a chance to speak about that.
Yeah, and the reason why I think he's such a good character, a good villain, as well for that game is also like with Wesker, where you be introduced to him at the start. He's the general of the U.S. Army, and you help him with different missions, and in the end of the game, he basically betrays you in the most brutal way in a first-person shooter game, I would say, uh, where basically you have been stealing informations from the Russians, and your main person called Rhodes is being shot down and everything, and his squad teammate then goes over to pick him up as they are running away from the Russians. General Shepard lands down in an airplane right in front of them, more or less, and you are basically shooting the Russians while your teammate Ghost is like dragging you across to get to General Shepard, and right in the last moment, when he basically they are face to face, you as the person who is Rhodes is face to face with General Shepard. You basically take his handgun and shoots the person you're playing as right in the stomach, and you can basically just see your teammate like, what? And that's the biggest twist of all. And just as you're being shot and you're being dragged down and everything, you can hear the others from Roach and Ghost team actually saying, "Do not trust Shepard" in the radio. And while they are basically has finished off the Russians who are attacking them and everything, you can see they're dragging off the British people to a small ground to a small hole where they are just tossing the fuel over and then burns the bodies, while you can hear the former teammates from which is Soap and Captain Price as well. Just here, do not trust Shepard still. They're saying that repeat on repeat as well. And then the best part of the game is like, actually you get the game turns your main point of center to Soap, which you were basically hearing in the radio from the first Modern Warfare game. And then your mission is just to hunt Shepard in the next two missions. And at the end, you get into this cinematic quick time events cutscene against Shepard with Captain Price and yourself, which is just, that was the best moment I ever felt in a video game, honestly. And the last click mouse button you had to do in the game was like left click to toss this knife, and it goes right through General Shepard's eye with the knife. It feels so good. And I never been more excited to hunt a person in a video game after that betrayal. So
Imagine hearing you talking about a villain that isn't Resident Evil based.
yeah. Oh,
Shocking. That's like kind of like, imagine me talking about a villain that isn't
it's
Final
a
Fantasy
fantasy.
Let's see if I can quickly think of one that I could really say. I think a good example of a villain I don't like, and it's not so much a person, it's a collective, but a narrative villain would be Mass Effect 2. I don't like the collectors at all. I feel like after the Reapers, which were these big space, like giant freaking space robots that could freaking, one of them could almost fuck over the universe. After that, just having these like basic bitch drone villains, it was like, eh? Like, one of the things I've always felt about BioWare games, more specifically the Dragon Age and the Mass Effect series, is that the villain in the first is always sort of decent and sort of it feels like a threat, and I think that's a big thing. That, like, this is moving back to Final Fantasy immediately. One of the things I like in a villain is the feeling that they can actually be a threat. And this is present within the Final Fantasy storyline. A lot of people talk about how good Heaven's Ward was as an expansion, and a lot of people don't like Stormblood because of the way it was paced. But I think people miss out that the villains in Stormblood were way better. Example being Xenos. Xenos appeared. He was a threat. He was there from the beginning of the story pretty much to the end of the story, and he constantly kept appearing, and he was a threat every time he appeared. He'd kick your ass, he'd kick the ass of everyone around you, and then he'd fuck off bored from fighting you. In Heaven's Ward, you didn't have that. You had Nidhogg, which they dealt with too fast narratively. Then you had the other villain, which I'm not going to speak of because Logic's got that to look forward to, so I don't want to reveal the twist. Then but they weren't present until right at the very end, and then you beat them because it's the end, and it was like, I don't like I feel like a villain or an antagonist needs to have presence within the story, or like even if it's going to be like a twist boss, have some kind of hints like breadcrumbed around that you can sort of guess it's coming, but not fully. There just needs
Yeah.
to be some presence that it doesn't just feel like the. A good example, actually, moving on to a different Final Fantasy, is Final Fantasy IX, one of like best received Final Fantasies of it. It's personally one of my least favorites. But there's this big build up to the final boss being Kuja, I believe it was the name. If I'm getting it wrong, any Final Fantasy IX fan, I apologize. It's been way too long since I've played it. But you have this build up to them being the final boss, and like they're sort of thrown in middle of the game, and then you find out at the end of the game, you fight them at the end of the game. But then another boss just comes in out of nowhere, and then you immediately fight that, and that's the end of the game. And it was like, what was the point? This added nothing narratively to the story. You just decided to add another villain that had no narrative importance. And I think another, like a lot of people as players, I feel keeping in the very. Obviously, I talk a lot about Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy has a lot of villains that can be talked about. And the big one of the most famous ones of all time, is obviously Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. Pretty much, even if you don't know Final Fantasy, everyone's heard of Sephiroth at one point in their life.
Yes, even me.
But there's this big misconception that he was the villain of the story, and if you're thinking about it like contextually from the point of the narrative start to end, he sort of is. But if you look at the bigger picture, mostly the compilation rarely shows you this. But even hints in FF7 show you Hojo, who is like he's a boss that you fight like 2/3 of the way into the story, and you defeat there, but like you never see him after that unless you're playing the full compilation. He's the real villain. A lot of what he did caused all the events, and it's just you've really got to see the perspective of like what is the villain and what's the just the antagonist that you got to deal with. I don't know if you guys have more to add on that.
I did. I'll be honest, I forgot what I was going to say then.
We're such good podcast planners.
Yes.
I blame you for not taking the lead on this one. I'm just spitballing off my brain. Take it.
Talking about heroes and villains. What do you think about, like, there's a saying that if you live long enough,
You see yourself become. You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That's what you're looking for.
yeah. Is there any of those persons in video games you think about when you think about? I do have one in mind. If you
I'm
want
gonna
to
let
hear it.
you. Yeah, you
So-
speak about yours because then
so-
it'll give me time to think. But can I ask? Is it a Resident Evil character?
No, it's not. It's not. It's Warcraft 3.
The big
Arthas.
Arthur.
Yes.
Yeah.
He basically starts as a hero. He's a paladin and everything, and who wants to do the best for his people in the most worst ways possible to save them, even if it goes against his own vows as a paladin. So what happens with Arthas is basically his people is getting plagued by the undeads, the scourge, by terrible virus infection thingy going on.
Don't you have a big obsession with people involved in zombies?
I might have. And it basically turns his entire nation into undead. But there's particular this one city where it goes beyond redemption for him, where he starts to slay innocent civilians to clear the city for infections, and then he goes after the Scourge faction in Northrend, where he slowly he doesn't care what it takes to defeat Mal'Ganis, which was his main arch enemy at that point, and he goes to Northrend and do everything in his power to actually slay him. And by the end of it all, he has obtained a Frostmourne, which slowly talks to him, twists his mind and everything, while he's slowly becoming the villain, the Lich King, as we know at the end of Warcraft 3, the Frozen Throne.
The good Lich King before Bolvar came along and it was shit. I definitely say World of Warcraft, actually, ironically, saying that. Blizzard are very good at writing characters that start off good and end bad. Sylvanas was very, she was a good cat. She was a good guy, turned bad.
Yeah.
Illidan was a good guy, but turned bad, but turned good.
Yeah. Kind of, and not. Basically, Arthas, he did defeat the main force he was fighting against in Northern at that time. But what he didn't know is how much influence the Berlin Legion had over him afterwards, when he basically, and then he actually started to raise the Scourge again afterwards. He actually slayed it the first time. So to answer your question, Peasant.
Pheasant?
Yeah, he's writing in the chat. Did I ever succeed in killing them? I forgot. So.
Heroes who became villains. I wouldn't really say it was a hero that became a villain so much as it was a hero that was later revealed to be the villain. But a game that I loved back on PS3, and obviously the PS3 version was a remake as it was a game called Tales of Grace's F. It's my favourite Tales of game that there is, and most Tales of fans think it's the worst, and I think they can go sucker, your screen's blurry. Yeah, they can go sucker, your screen's blurry. Richard in that, he was... You start as kids in Tales of Grace's F. You start as Asbal as a kid, and you kind of meet Richard and you befriend him, and then this incident happens, and then it kind of like time skips to you as an adult eventually. And then Richard you meet again, and he's king now. King? It's like, he goes to the next step of like whatever he was. I think it was a prince turned king. And you actually team up with him for like half of the game. And then it's revealed he was actually the bad guy. And so you as a character have been helping the bad guy this whole time. And then obviously then you go fight him. And I thought that was a really good example of like a sort of hero being a villain kind of situation, because I liked that idea that you was actually helping the enemy the whole time, but you didn't realize because they writ him well enough as a hero that you believed you was doing good things, and obviously you weren't. You as the character were doing terrible things for for all the wrong reasons as well.
Yeah, I think if they can blind you to the atrocities of what you're doing, and then sort of slap you in the face and make you go, oh, well, I guess I was doing the wrong thing. That's a very good way to write a story.
Definitely.
And I think going back a little, having a good guy, so to speak, that you play as, who then ends up by the end of the game essentially getting vilified for whatever they've done. Like doing questionable things in order to stop someone.
Handsome Jack.
Instead of everyone singing their praises, I think it can sort of build their character more realistically if they actually get told off essentially by everyone, and like you say, become the villain almost. Like even if you don't actually flat out become the enemy of the game.
I mean, if you actually play the pre-sequel, you understand that Jack's a good guy that became a villain.
Yeah,
Oh,
especially if it's at the result of like they become bad as the result of something the player does either or a character does in a previous game, or in the case of Borderlands 2, I guess. Yeah, I guess it's technically a previous game, the pre-sequel.
I think my big problem with the pre-sequels, the whole story, like it's actually one thing about Handsome Jack I didn't like the writing of, in that he becomes the villain because you attack him because they think he'll become the villain. Like that's sort of how it was written, and it was like, so we made him the villain by trying to kill him because we thought he might become a villain. Like, it's just a
Yeah,
stupid reasoning.
start to touch upon time paradoxes. It sounds very similar to obviously what we were watching in Final Space, whereby you find out the villain is actually the villain because the protagonist comes along and whoops their ass because
He thinks he's the villain.
yeah, exactly.
I think that's definitely a good thing with villainy as well. Well, villainy or protagonism is time. Anything to do with time, I'm always really interested in. A good example is the Alexander Raid series in Final Fantasy XIV, in that Alexander is a god that can control time, but he also is fully aware of the damage he can do. So he's sort of the villain. Like we have to go and fight him because he is the villain. Him being alive like takes Aether from the land, which is like the life soul of the land, and he's this god that will do destructive things. But he's aware of that, and he's actually sending shit back in time from the future to help you fight him to stop him making that future. And they did it in like a lot of people nowadays complain about Final Fantasy having time stuff involved with it. But even in the first Final Fantasy, Garland, the villain who becomes Chaos, actually is he's from the past, and he creates this time loop wherein you going to fight him in the future, or it's you going to fight him in the past, causes him to become the villain in the future, to send shit into the past to help him become the villain in the future, and it's just like you're just stuck in this cycle. So that's a really interesting way to make a villain as well, is with time stuff, especially if I like self-aware.
Yeah, as long as it's well executed. I mean, I'm always a bit sketchy when it comes to introducing time travel into anything. Obviously, a big example of that was Avengers. I kind of at the end of I believe it was Endgame or something, I'd been saying to people like, "Oh, they're gonna introduce time travelers. That's gonna be how they freaking defeat Thanos." I'm just like, and they did exactly that. And right, it's so easy. Like sometimes it could be really cheap. So your example sounds really good. Sometimes it can be done well, but you have to make sure it's not just a really, really cheap, easy way to get around a problem.
Well, time is really hard to write. And I'm going to go off games just for a second here. But even good examples of timey-wimey space stuff, using that saying on purpose, is Doctor Who. Doctor Who is probably one of the better people at writing time stuff, but they're also fucking awful at writing time stuff because they wipe out half their episodes by forgetting a single thing that would have changed the events of the thing you're watching now, but they forgot about it. So all of this shit's wiped out, and that then becomes the timeline, which then goes back and wipes it out again. So time stuff can be like I definitely think if you're gonna mess with time, especially when it comes to villains or protagonists, is that you need to be wary when writing it. You really need to have it set out. It really needs to be a from start to finish storyline, because if you mess up and if you just start and then you're like, we'll just keep going, your villains and their their goals and stuff like that can just get so twisted because you fucked up over time.
Yeah. I think that's actually, I hadn't really thought about Doctor Who at all. That's a good example of, a show where the quote unquote good guys do a lot of very questionable things sometimes and can even be the bad guys without realizing it, and the bad guys can sometimes be good guys. And it's also an example of with Davros and the Daleks. Is an example of the Doctor going back in time and doing things to piss him off and make him become the villain. Or at least, no, I don't actually know if that's true. Coming to think of it, they've got a lot of twists and knots in the plot line.
I refuse to talk. To just say, respond to Apocalypsis, I refuse to talk about Bioshock because me and Logic will end up in an argument.
Oh, yeah.
Because Infinite is garbage. 1 is garbage. They can't write. They don't understand the science. They're trying to be smarter than they are. Bioshock 2 is the best Bioshock.
I mean, Apocalypse does have a good point though. Of that was the character that is both the good guy and the bad guy. I didn't fully understand it myself. I would have to replay the game again.
You
But
have to wait till the writers understood the science.
Yeah, I suppose.
I will quickly talk about one character actually, thanks to Ray Alpha reminding me. Big Boss, or just I think she was just called Boss. I don't remember she had the big part. Boss in Metal Gear 3 was a really good character, of a character that you thought was the villain. And like they really bigged her up as this villain, and just at last moment before you kill her, you actually find out everything she was doing that seemed bad, she was doing for good reason, to prepare your character as the protagonist to become this hero that she couldn't become because of other stuff. And that was a really interesting kind of twist, is that this character was so well written as a villain that you never realized she was actually the hero all along, and that you were the hero. Like, it didn't make you less of a hero, but what she was doing for such a good reason, to help you. Which I think was really good writing.
And I can also see that Artorias Minsk and Sarah Kerrigan is being mentioned as well, and I think they have actually a good point, because Sarah Kerrigan started out as a shady good person in StarCraft, while fighting off the Zerg. She is in this rogue, not rogue, ghost program in StarCraft, where people have psychic powers and so on. And Arcturus Minsk, he basically leaves Sarah Kerrigan behind on a planet where she actually becomes one of the greatest villains in StarCraft universe in the first game. And then in the second game they changed, of course they changed her story a bit, so actually all that the Zerg did, actually the reason why they changed her into to make her this giant powerful monster as they wanted to, was to actually stop another powerful villain coming to the universe. But yeah, basically Arcturus Minsk made a forced a good person into being turned into another powerful villain in a video game.
Well, Blizzard like to do that, as I said. Another example is obviously Illidan, who was he was doing evil things and becoming evil because he was trying to stop the evil Legion from getting to it.
Yeah.
But Blizzard are really good at setting up the story. They're terrible at executing it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And it's a big problem that's come to light with Blizzard recently, especially with characters like Sylvanas. Like, a lot of people shit on Sylvanas because of what she's become, or they try to act like she was bad all along as a character. She was written really well in Warcraft, Warcraft was really just a big world setting example. But then when they got into World of Warcraft and started to write the characters, they just lost control. And it's another thing of, I think sometimes with a villain or a character, be it good guy or bad guy, you just have to kill it off because there's only so much you can write before it starts to get messy, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what they did with Handsome Jack, where, they used him just enough, I think, that we still love him, and, they didn't overstretch him to the point where we're just like, oh, get rid of him already. We're done with this now.
Yeah, they could have wrote him too long.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely, like, Emmett was a good example back to 14 in that he came and went within one expansion, but the impact he left was so fucking big. Like, if you talk to any Final Fantasy player who's finished Shadowbringers, everyone has some level of opinion of Emmett, except for Slandy, but Slandy doesn't count because Slandy doesn't appreciate good writing.
No. Cheesy. Cheesy writing is the best writing. That's the only thing I can understand, that's why.
Is what?
That's the only thing I can understand because everything goes too deep otherwise.
I'm shaking my head at you. Looking at the time, however, I am going to do a wrap-up statement. Also, Pheasant, Blizzard have always been sort of terrible before Activision came along, but we'll talk about that in Discord later. Essentially, as I say, Blizzard are very good at setting up a world, but terrible at writing it after they've set it up. Warcraft 3 was a big setup writing. But my closing statement for it all is that one thing I've noticed, we're all very much drawn to villains, antagonists. I think there's some level of us that I think there's some part of us all the time that kind of wants the villains to win, just for that drama. Good guys, don't write them too good. It's boring. Make them sort of bad because there's some relatability to that. All of us have some parts of us that we'd rather not look at. And I think that's why we like villains, because it's looking at that stuff that really in our head we're thinking, yeah, I can get what they're on. But you don't want to be that person. But you can, in a villain, see that and relate. And so it's seeing that part of us that we don't want to see. And that's my opinion on why we like villains.
And maybe also, facing that as well as like your challenge.
So yeah, protagonists need to be more interesting.
Yeah, push them more into a grey area. Don't make them too good.
Yeah, grey is the good ground, both as a villain or a good guy. Sort of grey, always.
The
So
only good protagonist is the one who can punch boulders.
you just have to shake your head with me, Lardrix, a second. Right, so closing announcements. I would say to anyone who's currently watching us on
Twitch,
and hasn't already followed, please do follow. It really helps us a lot, and we're working towards affiliate. Literally, followers is all we need. If you didn't know already, please go to our YouTube channel. It's, I don't know if it's in the description. Slandy will write it somewhere.
yes.
We also have a Discord, which is where we try to announce everything that we do. Currently, we're messaging other Discords that we're in because obviously it helps for exposure, but we'd like to have it where people who actually enjoy our content can just get it directly from us. So if you can join our Discord, that would be great. Slandy will put that somewhere as well. Other than that, announcements that we have. I'm continuing obviously with my Haven series that I've been doing here. I have until August to get all of that finished, and then I'll be doing Kenna Bridge of Spirits, and then I have until November after that, and then I'll be doing Endwalker. I still stream bits of other games now and then. I'm still considering a Sims run through. Slandy will hopefully be moving to the Pretty Casual Gaming channel with his Final Fantasy game play stuff after he's finished the MSQ on his own channel. Upcoming stuff, we have our 10th episode podcast, which will probably be in 2 weeks. More than likely that will be on weekends now because it's just more convenient for all three of us. That will be a talking about games episode. That will be talking about games that we've seen. It's kind of because our first ever episode was about talking about games, and this will be our 10th episode, which obviously is a milestone, really. It's 10 episodes every 2 weeks, so that's like 20 weeks. But we've been doing this. That's almost 5 months. And obviously, a lot of games have been announced at E3 and stuff like that. We can now say we can talk about. So that's that episode. After that, I have the 11th episode planned as a talk about A Realm Reborn, Final Fantasy 14. Both these episodes have obviously been kind of decided by me, and I'm going to be writing up the plan for them. The A Realm Reborn episode will be taking a perspective of someone who's played the game since A Realm Reborn, and then it'll also be taking people like Logic's opinion, people like Slandy's who skipped it. Not even that bothered. The point is that we'll be taking a ton of different perspectives, and we might have 1 or 2 guests. We're not sure yet. So we'll see close to the time. When that happens, I'll probably let people know a bit more in our next episode of the podcast. Other than that, I don't really think we have any other announcements unless you two can think about.
Nope. I think you hit every note pretty well.
But if you're watching this on YouTube, obviously please like, please subscribe, please comment. It helps. Do it.
Ruined.
Slandy, let
Unlimited
people know
power.
let people know what you're doing on your channel and where the people can find you other than here.
Yeah, on Twitch, Slanderman, Twitch TV, Slanderman. I'm doing the main quiz, main scenario quest on Fridays at the moment. On Final Fantasy, and then some other games at times. Apart from that,
finished.
no, I've taken my good time. No, until the launch. Yeah, and that's basically where I am.
And Logic, let people know where they can find you, if anything, and what you're doing.
You can find me in the Pretty Casual Gaming Discord. Other than that, just the void. I am not currently doing anything at the moment.
But you have said that you were considering maybe at some point streaming on Pretty Casual Gaming. Something.
Yeah, I haven't thought about what I'd like to stream. I might stream Far Cry 5 and New Dawn. Since we've been talking about villains, there's some fantastic villains in those games, and I want to play through them again. I've been enjoying those games, so we'll have to discuss that.
Aye. So hopefully in the coming, the hope is in the next year or so that our channels will be full of content from all 3 of us. Is the real goal. Currently we are quite happy having Logics in our little crew. We haven't decided if there's anyone else joining yet. Obviously, we're always going to try have some more guests and that lot to keep conversations fresh and outside just our opinion. Other than that, that's pretty much all we have for now. So, Slandy, say goodbye and cue the music, and don't talk whilst you're fricking before you're muted. Later, guys.
Later.